Hi, thanks for joining. In this video today, we're going to look at connecting open source models in AutoGen Studio. I'm going to look at a few different models. I'm going to look at Llama 2 13B, Llama 2 70 billion parameter model. We'll look at Mistral 7B, Code Llama 34B, and Wizard LM 70B. Got a brand new AutoGen Studio container running on my Tanzu Kubernetes environment here. Just spun up today. I like to spin new ones up of these. Good and bad. Sometimes we do daily builds, so they can be a little alpha-like experience, but they're always building new stuff into this AutoGen Studio interface. When we want to interact with our agents, we use sessions, and you'll see if I click on New Session here, I will define a workflow, and that's how I will determine which models are used in a given session. If I go to my Build tab, we'll see we have agents and workflows. And agents are really a way to save the settings for an agent, to potentially be able to use the same agent across multiple workflows. If I were only going to use a particular agent setting for one workflow and one workflow only, I wouldn't need to create an agent for that, because you can define the agent settings within a workflow. I can go into my workflows. We'll create a new workflow. I'm going to call this one Llama 2 13B workflow, so I make it easy to see which one's which. We'll click on our receiver. These are pretty good defaults. Let's just go ahead and change. Now, when you change the agent specification in a workflow, it does not go back and change the agent itself. So you can customize, you could think of an agent as a template of values, and you can customize that template on a workflow basis without changing the template itself. And so here we'll just go ahead and reapply that model. Let's go ahead and copy and paste my values in one more time here. This is my URL, model name, and our API key, and then we'll add the model. Now we have a workflow. Okay, again, press OK, and then we'll see the new workflow created. And now we can go into the playground. I can create a new session with our 13B workflow. We'll go ahead and create, and we'll say, can you show me a basic on the world function? The point here is we're not testing the capabilities of the model now. We just want to show that we connected it to our Llama 2 13B model, and that's working now. Again, while it's thinking, we only get this little busyness indicator. And if you want to see what's happening behind the scenes, if you go back to your command line from wherever you instantiated. And so I think now it is asking for user feedback, and we can see here another flaw in the UI. The UI doesn't apparently handle user interactions. It makes sense why the default settings on this are never ask the user, because I think you have to go to the terminal. Can you show me and provide feedback to user proxy? Press enter to skip, or use auto reply, or type exit. So you got to go back to your terminal. No human input received, using auto reply. Okay. And we got a reasonable response here. It's not in the typical format, but it'll work just fine. Just a print statement. Yeah, a little, not exactly what I was thinking of, but it kind of meets the requirements. And once this is done, now it did terminate the conversation quickly, so that's nice. So we only had the two agent calls, and we can drill into that window here, the agent message windows, to see, again, quite often, depending on what you ask, it may require the agent to have a number of back and forth messages, and the outside in this standard box here will just show the final response of the interaction. Great. So now we've seen some of the bugs that are at least in the current version of the time of recording, a little bit about how to deal with those. Kind of my takeaway from that is, as of this moment, it doesn't appear to make sense through the AutoGen Studio web UI to even really mess with the agents themselves, but really just on a workflow by workflow basis to define the agentic behavior you want associated with that workflow, because there's at the time of recording some bugs in that ability to apply an agent template to a workflow. So easy enough to work around if you know what to expect. And it is expected, right? This is a really cool project. It's open source. It's very new. And we're using the daily build. And so not from a buggy behavior standpoint, definitely within the range of what's expected and not too bad for an early stage project like this. So let's go ahead and let's look at those other models. So now we'll go ahead and we'll do another workflow here for our 70 billion parameter model. So we'll go new workflow, and we'll call this one 270B. We'll go into the assistant here, and for this workflow, we'll go ahead and add a new model. We'll call this one the specific model name from your model provider, and your API key from your model hosting provider, and then your base URL. Add model. Press OK. And now we've got a new workflow that's for our Llama 2 70B. We'll go to Playground. And I'm just going to actually copy and paste the same question. Again, say new. We're going to use our 70B workflow. And now we can ask the question. Again, if you want to watch it working behind the scenes here, seems to be taking its sweet time. Okay. And we got our response back. And interestingly, both provide a command but not a function. Maybe this is just what's to expect. And one thing I should mention is, again, we're not just asking our question to this model. If you were just to go and query any one of these models with a basic chat completion endpoint, you may get a very different response. Because if you just query the chat completion endpoint, you can send it just this question, right? But again, in this case, we have that agent that is inserting additional context in that system message. So that may be impacting the results. I wonder if I go into OpenAI here and open a new ChatGPT window. And let's see what GPT-4 says if I ask the same question, just for fun. This is what I expected. Because I asked for a function, a print hello world is a command, it's not a function. And so that is interesting that even the 70B model was not quite what I expected here. But it's still helpful, right? Like, I think where any of the models, whether it's you're using an open source application like GPT Pilot or Grimoire Custom GPT or any of them, don't use a model today to help you code if you don't know how to verify what it's doing, because they're all have issues, but they're all helpful, right? If I didn't know what to put in my function, but I knew how to type in the syntax for a function, this could have been potentially helpful. Now we saw the 70 billion parameter. Let's go ahead and let's move on. So let's see, next let's try Mistral, see what Mistral does here. Okay, we'll go ahead and say new workflow. And we want to call this one Mistral 7B. So this is not Mixtral, right? This is the regular Mistral 7B workflow here. And we'll go ahead and say we want to get rid of that model. We'll leave everything else the same. And our base URL. Oops. Come on. Back to that. Base and API key, and then we'll say Mistral. Add our model. And press OK. And OK. Now we can go back to our playground. We'll create a new session. Actually, before I do that, just copy this question one more time. create a new session. I'm going to click on the general agent workflow and then click back to the Mistral B7 workflow. See if that... Okay. So now I have a Mistral 7B workflow. Let's ask Mistral now. Here we have our results from our Mistral 7B. And you may notice I look a little different than I do in the rest of the video. I had, when I recorded the main video yesterday, I had a typo in the model name for my Mistral 7B, so I just had to adjust that. And again, that was for my model server. In your case, you're going to use the model name that wherever you're getting your model from, if you're running it locally, or if you have another external source you're getting the model provider from, you'll make sure you want to use the model from your provider. But I did go ahead and I found my error, updated it, and we can see here the results for the Mistral 7B workflow, and it actually did, unlike the Llama 2 13B and the Llama 2 70B, it actually did do this properly in a nice function. And again, that may have to do with how our system message, we're using again the default system message that comes with that general agent when you open AutoGen, and that may be impacting some, but I think it's impressive. This Mistral 7B workflow, which will work on most modern laptops and desktops even without a GPU, did come back with a very solid result here. Next, let's try code Llama 34B. We'll go ahead and say new workflow, and we want to call this one code Llama, and I'm using, as you can see here, code Llama 34B instruct-hf as the specific build of this model. API key, and put in our base URL. Okay, so now we've got only one model on this list, and we'll create the code Llama workflow and go back and create a new session. And again, this time when I create the session, I'm going to toggle away from whatever shows up the most recent, because we've seen consistently in AutoGen Studio, sometimes things, even if they appear to be there, they don't actually apply unless there is some type of on-change event. So let's go ahead and create this workflow now, and we can ask a question. There we go. Code Llama. That gave me a lot closer to what I expected, even the Llama 2 70B. And I think it's kind of to be expected. We know GPT-4 is kind of the king of all the metrics now, including coding. The Llama 2 70B does come pretty close in a lot of aspects, but it may be wise if you are using 70B to be able to use different models for different model questions. Then you can create agents that act as routers that can allow the question to be routed based on having the agent analyze the question and then determine which other agent or which model behind other agents in these multi-agent workflows. You can have a single workflow that divides tasks based on the question asked, different agents that use different models in the back end. And last but not least, let's use Wizard LM. Let's go back and build, and we'll go ahead and create a new workflow for our Wizard LM 70B. And 70B, we'll call this one. And then we'll go ahead and modify our primary assistant, our model name here, and then get your API key and your base URL. And then we got that model set up. That's okay. We'll go ahead back into our playground. I'm going to copy this question, so I'm going to ask in the same exact wording and see how Wizard LM handles this. Now we'll go ahead and create a new session, and again we'll toggle to some other workflow and toggle back to make sure the settings apply properly, and then create that. Okay, and while that is thinking, again, if you have your terminal prompt, you can open up and see what's happening in the background. And it's already finished running, so we don't need to look at that. And we can see here that our results, it gave us a file, so that's kind of interesting. It looks like the Wizard LM gave us the same response. Instead of responding in text or in text and as a file, it just provided a file, which could be good, I don't know. But it did not represent our hello world command in a context of a function. So, and maybe we could word it differently, and I'm sure if we word it differently, we could get it to output a function. But it is, I think, a basic test of a model that how it can respond to a natural language question. And again, this is again not purely a test of the model itself, because we are. So let's go back and look at these workflows. All these workflows have the same primary assistant message. This is the default primary assistant message that's currently being used, at the time of recording in AutoGen. And so we can see here, your helpful assistant, solve problems, blah, 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 blah. It says, if a failure occurred and respond with code to address it. If the request has not been addressed, respond with code to address it. And so it doesn't seem to me like that this prompt should get in the way, but just to be fair, this isn't the same as just sending a question to the model. This is sending a question in the context of this system message that's being wrapped through AutoGen's function and how they choose to wrap the message within AutoGen code. So perhaps something there is causing it to respond differently. But in any case, we saw for each of these models in terms of Wizard, LM, Llama 2 7db and Llama 2 13b both responded to the question asking for that Python hello world function. They responded with the command properly, command that worked to print hello world, but they didn't wrap it in a function. Whereas our Code Llama response and our Mistral 7b response did show us how to put it in the appropriate function syntax. Let's look at a little bit more about these models. When you use open source models, at least at the time of recording this, I don't think there's another model with the same flexibility and efficacy across the same breadth of capabilities that you have with GPT-4. And so, of course, open source models are progressing, and there's been a lot of data that shows they're progressing, perhaps even faster. We'll see what OpenAI comes out with in the future, but it's at least very close. In the case of open source models, you may want to optimize different questions to use a combination of several different models, and no reason why not to do so, especially if you have invested in some servers with some GPU hardware. You can have them serve most of these models just as equally with appropriate GPU. And so let's see, we've got the Llama 2 13b. Let's look at the max token size that we see here, right? On 13b, we've got a 4K token size. And then Code Llama, a nice advantage here, we've got a 16K token size. And so while the questions may be oriented towards code, that gives you a lot more real estate there to be able to ask code-related questions, which is nice. Llama 2 70b, we're still at that 4K tokens. And Wizard 70b, also 4K tokens. Now, interesting, I didn't even realize this, but according to this, Mistral 7b takes 32K tokens. So that is quite impressive for a smaller model. These are all important factors to consider for how you ask the questions. And so I'm really curious to see with Mistral versus some of these larger models like Llama 2 or Wizard LM, if that larger context size, if it'll end up having some of the similar lost in the middle problems as I experiment with it more. Because when you deal with chunking and having to pass different chunks of a document that you want the model to understand across multiple different queries, and you do potentially lose something there in terms of efficacy, and then there's a lot that you could potentially lose just from how do I do my chunking strategy. And if you're feeding in retrieval augmented generation for a source that's not trained on, I found that the more relevant information you can fit into a single context from retrieval augmented generation, the better the response you typically get. So that is interesting to see. I'm going to be doing a lot more testing and comparisons of the various different open source models. I'll do some additional open source models and also compare them back against OpenAI more in future videos. So thanks everybody for joining.